Welcome to the first episode of Matt's Thoughts. Today I want to take a look at an exchange between every progressive's wannabe grandfather, Bernie Sanders, and Scott Pruitt. So this took place in Scott Pruitt's hearing to be the new administrator of the EPA, and I thought it was interesting and something to kind of break down and look at. So let's get to it. We'll get started here and play a little bit of that clip.
Senator Sanders. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for being late, but we were at a hearing with Congressman Price, who is the nominee for HHS, and perhaps not a great idea to have important nominating hearings at exactly the same time. So I apologize for not being here earlier. My office has received a great deal of comments from people in the state of Vermont, which takes environmental protection very seriously, as well as from all over the country. And the fear is that the nomination of Mr. Pruitt is a nomination designed to protect the fossil fuel industry and not the environment. I would like to ask Mr. Pruitt a question. As I understand it, earlier in this hearing, you said that Mr. Trump was wrong in suggesting and stating over and over again that climate change was a quote-unquote hoax. Is that in fact the case?
That is correct, Senator.
Okay.
Okay. So we need to stop and look at a couple things here. So first of all, right off the bat, Senator Sanders is turning this into an us versus them mentality. And let's be clear. I'm not here to talk about whether climate change is real or isn't. That's not what this is. This is talking about how he's basically vilifying fossil fuels. And this goes for many politicians, not just Bernie Sanders. But you got to realize that the Western civilization, the way it currently exists, with all of our technology, is only made possible by the use of fossil fuels. We simply consume far too much energy right now to use many of these alternatives. And someone needs to ask people like Bernie Sanders and others that think the same way, how is it possible for you to perform all these different activities and use all these different products that you have available to you daily without the use of fossil fuels? See, it's just not possible. But also, aside from that, let's realize that Scott Pruitt here has just found common ground with Bernie Sanders. That, he's not a climate change denier. He recognizes that it's a thing. Like, this is something that's happening. So they agree here. This is, something that Sanders probably isn't used to, going up against someone that would consider themselves a Republican. I don't know. But let's see what happens next.
Let me ask you this. As you may know, some 97% of scientists who have written articles for peer-reviewed journals have concluded that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. Do you believe that climate change is caused by by carbon emissions, by human activity?
There we go. That a Bernie. Straight to the ultimatum, to the end-all, be-all of questions. See, the 97% question is loaded, and it's loaded with garbage. Let me back up a bit. So the entire premise of this question is based off the validity of the 97%. Now, the 97% is basically this truth, this ultimate truth that particularly the left uses, that 97% of all climate scientists believe or know, can factually represent that climate change is happening, and not only just happening, but that humans are the primary cause and pretty much the sole reason. Now, here's the issue with that. The researcher, the scientist behind this study, was a man named John Cook. Now, John Cook, when he did this, when he came up with this research, or when he did the research and came up and wrote the paper, he made a lot of assumptions. And see, the problem with that is, that's not science. Science isn't assuming. Science is simply coming up with a hypothesis, testing, checking for data, running your experiment, recording that data. So you have your observation there, and then seeing if your results equal your hypothesis. And if they do, great, keep testing it. If not, refine it, etc. Now, what he was essentially doing was he was looking through other papers, other research papers by other climatologists, and looking through and be like, I think that they are implying that humans are the main and maybe even the only issue. So I'm going to write that down as a check mark for me. So that's just not true. So this question's loaded and it's wrong. And it's just not fair. So the 97% is bogus and it's not an argument. However, for the sake of this, let's just continue watching and see what Scott Pruitt has to say.
Senator, as I indicated, you weren't in here during my opening statement, but as I indicated in my opening statement, the climate is changing, and the human activity contributes to that in some manner.
In some manner.
Yes, sir.
97% of the scientists who wrote articles in peer-reviewed journals believe that human activity is the fundamental reason we are seeing climate change. You disagree with that?
I believe the ability to measure with precision the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate on whether the climate is changing or whether human activity contributes to it.
Okay, so what Scott Pruitt just said was yes, to some extent, humans play a role in climate change. Now, Bernie might have some difficulty, comprehending this because he's probably sitting there thinking in this partisan mindset. But even if he's not, regardless of that, Pruitt agreed. Now, what Pruitt did say, to clarify though, is that he's not going to sit there and agree that it's 100% done by humans. And I don't care what study you look at, nothing is going to I can't say nothing, but the majority of studies will agree that you can't simply say that humans are 100% the reason or the cause of climate change. And that's all that Pruitt's trying to say. Now, that's probably not going to fly with Bernie. So let's see what happens next.
While you are not certain, the vast majority of scientists are telling us that if we do not get our act together and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, there is a real question as to the quality of the planet that we are going to be leaving our children and our grandchildren. So you are applying for a job as administrator for the EPA to protect our environment. Overwhelming majority of scientists say we have got to act boldly, and you're telling me that there needs to be more debate on this issue and that we should not be acting boldly.
You know what, Bernie? You're right. Scott Pruitt isn't going to act boldly, and he doesn't want to, and he shouldn't. And let me explain why. I don't remember if it was the IPCC or not. There's so many of these different climate sources out there now. But at least a few of them over the last couple of years have claimed we have reached the threshold, like we have gone too far. There's no turning back. Humanity has lost. There might be some argument to be held between, if we keep, adding regulations and cutting carbon, that we might, reduce the effects, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't matter. Now, the point Scott Pruitt's getting at, it can be seen in Australia, where they actually walked back some of the regulations, some of the legislation they passed to stop or prevent climate change, because it was economically hurting them. See, Scott Pruitt realizes that, we can't just rush in blindly, not boldly, but blindly, and pass all these new laws and regulations, that may not even have that great of an effect, but can cripple the American citizen financially. So that is what Scott Pruitt and I think the EPA needs to be careful about, and I think that's what he's referring to here.
No, Senator, as I've indicated, the climate is changing, and human activity.
But you haven't told me
that.
why you think the climate is changing.
Well, Senator, the job of the administrator is to carry out the statutes as passed by this body and to
Why is the climate changing?
So Pruitt's personal opinion here isn't that relevant. The administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, their main responsibility is to enforce the different regulations, different policies, such as the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. his personal opinion towards any of these things, not that important. I mean, even when he was Attorney General back in, I think it was Oklahoma, I mean, he might not have personally agreed with a certain thing, certain issue, but he had to enforce it. That was his job. So,
Senator, in response to the CO2 issue, the EPA administrator is constrained by statutes.
I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
You are
figuring
going to be
out.
the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
Senator, I've acknowledged to you that the human activity impacts the climate.
Impacts.
Yes.
Scientific community doesn't tell us it impacts. They say it is the cause of climate change. We have to transform our energy system. Do you believe we have to transform our energy system in order to protect the planet for future?
okay, first of all, saying that humans impact climate is saying that they are a cause, not the cause. See, that's the difference here. Bernie wants him to really say the cause, because that's what Bernie thinks. That's what Bernie's selectively chosen from the scientific community, not gone out and gathered a consensus of the scientific community. The second part, too, is he's talking about, changing or finding new sources of energy. Yeah, that's something that's naturally going to happen. I read something recently. I was in a magazine while I was at the dentist's office, so I'm not really sure. Couldn't find it online. But basically, I think it was saying about 2028 or so, something like 25% of all the power in the U.S. will be 100%, or energy in the U.S., excuse me, is 100% going to be driven by alternative sources of energy. So like solar, wind, hydroelectric, and really solar is the one that's going to be taking over. But really the best way to promote that, the best way to develop things like solar power is letting the free market do its thing. Not having the government, like under the Obama administration, subsidize all these horrible, well, they weren't all, but most of them were crappy companies trying to push solar power. They were losing money. That's never going to work. Let the free market work its thing. Once the prices drop to where a company can make a profit and so can the consumer, solar energy will be hot.
I believe the EPA has a very important role at regulating the emissions
You didn't
of
answer
CO2.
my question. Do you believe we have to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to do what the scientific community is telling us in order to make sure that this planet is healthy for our children and grandchildren?
Senator, I believe that the administrator has a very important role to perform in regulating CO2.
Okay, so that's enough just rambling back and forth between the two about climate change. So here we go on to topic 2.
Can you tell me, as I think all of us know, Oklahoma has been subjected to a record-breaking number of earthquakes. Scientists in Oklahoma, or scientists say that Oklahoma is almost certain to have more earthquakes with heightened risk of a large quake probable to endure for a decade, and that the cause of this is fracking. Can you point me, picking up on Senator Harris's discussion with you, can you point me to any opinion that you wrote, any enforcement actions you took against the companies that were injecting waste fracking water?
Okay, so Bernie is halfway there on this one. He did a good job at making sure to mention that it's the wastewater injection wells that are causing these induced earthquakes, but what he did mess up is on the fracking. It's not fracking. Actually, according to U.S. Geological Survey, fracking is not causing most of the induced earthquakes. Wastewater disposal is, but not all wastewater injection wells are causing it. And also it mentions that wastewater is actually produced from all forms of oil extraction, from like oil wells. So to single out fracking is just wrong. I'm not really sure what the motive is from politicians, specifically the left, against fracking, because you could technically target all of the oil industry for this issue because it's the wastewater wells. But fracking seems to be their big target, and that's just not true.
Senator, let me say I'm very concerned about the connection between activity in Oklahoma.
And therefore, you
seismicity.
must have taken action. I guess, can you tell me who you fined for doing this, if you're very concerned?
the Corporation Commission in Oklahoma is vested with the jurisdiction, and they've actually acted on that.
And you have made public statements expressing your deep concern about this.
We have worked with, through our...
You have made public statements. You're in a state which is seeing a record-breaking number of earthquakes. You're the Attorney General. Obviously, you have stood up and said you will do everything you can to stop future earthquakes as a result of fracking.
Senator, I've acknowledged that I'm concerned about...
You acknowledge that you are concerned. Your state is having a record number of... Well, if that's the kind of administrator for the EPA, your state's having a record-breaking number of earthquakes, you acknowledge you are concerned. If that's the kind of EPA administrator you will be, you're not going to get my vote.
So I'm actually going to agree with Bernie Sanders a little bit here. I don't think it could have hurt Scott Pruitt to maybe show some concern, public concern, like, hey, we have a lot of earthquakes. They're not natural earthquakes. These are induced earthquakes. This is something to look at. But at the same time, you can't expect the man to start a war with the oil industry. I mean, oil by itself, like that, is bringing so much revenue for the state. It's increasing profits for everyone. You know, everyone in the state's going to benefit from that to some extent. So you can't ask him to go to war with these people. And, you know, I think it'd be more constructive, and this isn't just a gripe on Bernie, this is a gripe on all of these hearings. Every time there's a new president, he starts trying to bring in new administrators. Let's not be so attack-oriented, so divisive. Let's actually sit down and interview. And that's essentially what this is. This is an interview. When you apply for a job, your hopefully new employer, or the person you want to employ you, isn't attacking you and stabbing at you verbally. You know, let's sit down and have a discussion, be constructive. But, you know, anyways, that's my 2 cents. This was just a quick video to kind of point out some of the ridiculousness going on here in these hearings and kind of look at it from a different angle, maybe shed some light and share some facts. So, if you like this video, awesome, I appreciate it. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and tune in for more of Matt's Thoughts.